Pacific Rim made $101 million in the US and $309 million abroad. The Mummy made $80 million in the US and $329 million abroad. Every single one of these films and many more in this video were declared flops in the US, and every single one of them made 2, 3, sometimes 8 more money the moment you stepped outside American borders. So what actually is going on here? Let's start with Pacific Rim, released in 2013. Guillermo del Toro's Pacific Rim at its core is a love letter to Japanese kaiju films and mecha anime. Giant interdimensional monsters called kaiju emerge from a rift beneath the Pacific Ocean. Humanity's response is to build enormous humanoid war machines called Jaegers, each piloted by 2 people whose minds are neurally linked together. What follows is 2+ hours of spectacular carnage between creatures the size of skyscrapers and robots the size of also skyscrapers. Del Toro made something that felt unlike anything else in mainstream American cinema at the time. American audiences, it turned out, were not particularly interested. Pacific Rim had a production budget in the range of $190 million. It opened in the United States in the summer of 2013 and barely made $100 million in total domestic gross. With the budget the movie had, it needed to make well over $300 million worldwide just to break even. Fortunately, China loved Pacific Rim. It earned $112 million. Something about the film's DNA resonated with Chinese audiences. I guess the imagery borrowed from anime and manga made it popular in Asia. Its worldwide total reached $411 million. The success of Pacific Rim was significant enough that a sequel was greenlit. But when Pacific Rim Uprising came out in 2018 without Del Toro directing, it was largely disappointing both critically and commercially. Next is one of my favorite movies from 2016, Warcraft. I am still sad that they never released the sequel. Duncan Jones, the director of the movie, was handed the keys to adapt one of the most popular video game franchises in history. He spent years developing the film, working to craft something that would satisfy both long-time fans of the games and general audiences. The result was a film that earned mixed reviews. It struggled to make its complex fantasy world accessible to newcomers and opened to approximately $47 million in North American theaters against a production budget of $160 million. By any conventional Hollywood standard, that was a catastrophe. In China though, Warcraft made $156 million in its first 5 days alone, which at the time was the biggest opening for any foreign film in Chinese box office history. By the time Warcraft finished its global run, it had earned $439 million worldwide. More than $220 million of that came from China. Without China, the movie would have been an utter failure. Why did Warcraft work in China though? The answer is both simple and genuinely interesting. World of Warcraft, the massive multiplayer online game that spawned this universe, was enormous in China. The game had tens of millions of active players in China at its peak, and those players had spent years, sometimes thousands of hours immersed in the world of Azeroth. For them, seeing that world rendered on the big screen was watching their beloved mythology come to life. The film didn't need to explain who the orcs were or why the war between species mattered. Its Chinese audience already knew, and they turned out in unprecedented numbers to celebrate the release of the movie. Another movie that did very well in China, but did poorly in North America, is The Great Wall. Matt Damon stars as a European mercenary who arrives at the Great Wall of China and discovers an ancient army of soldiers has been defending it for centuries against a supernatural threat. The film was shot entirely in China. It was a genuine co-production between American and Chinese studios and had an estimated budget of $150 million. In North America, it earned approximately $45 million, less than a third of its production budget. Critics in the United States were divided at best, and many American audiences simply weren't drawn to the premise. But in China, The Great Wall earned more than $170 million, and internationally, it pulled in close to $290 million. The concept of Chinese soldiers and Chinese history rendered through the visual language of a massive Hollywood spectacle resonated deeply with Chinese audiences in a way it simply did not with American ones. Do you remember John Carter? John Carter arrived in 2012 and remains one of the most surprising disasters in the history of modern Hollywood. This is another movie I thoroughly enjoyed and was shocked that it did not do well in the US. American audiences looked at John Carter, a Civil War veteran transported to Mars who battles exotic alien creatures, and saw something that seemed like a knockoff of Star Wars and Avatar. To them, the story no longer felt fresh. Disney spent somewhere in the range of $263 million producing the film, then added over $100 million in marketing costs. The movie opened behind the Lorax in its second weekend, which is something I am sure the studio executives would never have imagined happening. John Carter finished with $73 million in North America and $211 million internationally for a worldwide total of approximately $284 million. The movie cost $350 million to make, so they had a big loss here. There were places where John Carter genuinely caught on. The film set an opening day record in Russia, and several European markets responded more warmly than American ones. Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets is another movie that on the surface looks like it should have been a big hit in the US, but it wasn't. The French filmmaker behind The Fifth Element and Leon the Professional had spent decades wanting to adapt the classic French science fiction comic series Valerian and Laureline. Besson finally made his film. He waived his own director's fee. He personally financed the most expensive independent film ever produced with a budget of approximately $180 million. The film opened in the United States against Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk. This was, to put it gently, not an ideal opponent. Valerian earned $17 million in its opening weekend. Its domestic run would earn around $40 million, roughly a quarter of its production budget. Besson had anticipated that American audiences might not be receptive. He had said publicly that he could feel resistance from American moviegoers. The Fifth Element, his previous space opera, had made nearly 70% of its money overseas. France gave Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets its strongest market, approximately $41 million. Even that might be considered a disappointment, since that's Benson's home country, and the comic series was also from France. The film earned about $225 million worldwide. This was nowhere near enough, given the scale of the budget and the marketing costs involved. Besson's studio posted an $83 million loss in the 6 months following the film's release. The planned Valerian trilogy was quietly shelved. In the end, even the international markets that Besson had carefully cultivated couldn't rescue the film despite its astonishing visual imagination. Who remembers Universal's attempts to launch a cinematic universe? The so-called Dark Universe. It collapsed before it properly began, but not before producing The Mummy starring Tom Cruise. It earned $31 million in its opening weekend in North America, the lowest opening of the entire Mummy franchise. Critics absolutely destroyed it. IndieWire called it the worst Tom Cruise movie ever. Rotten Tomatoes settled at 15%. Internationally though, something different happened. The Mummy generated a foreign debut of $140.7 million. In China alone, the film earned $52.4 million in its opening weekend. In South Korea, it set records. The film made $80 million in North America and $329 million internationally for a worldwide total of $410 million. $410 million sounds like a success. It was not exactly. The combined production budget and global marketing spend was estimated at $345 million. And Deadline's financial analysis concluded the film would lose somewhere around $95 million when all streams of revenue were accounted for. The Dark Universe died after The Mummy. Universal announced in 2019 that it will move away from the shared Monster Universe model and focus on standalone films. This is just a few films that I personally loved that surprised me that they flopped in the US. There are still many more like this that I wouldn't go into so that this video won't get to 30 minutes. Battleship, released in 2012 starring Rihanna, earned only $65 million in the US against a production budget of over $209 million. Internationally, it pulled in $237.6 million. The final chapter of the Resident Evil movies made less than $27 million in North America. 91% of the gross came from overseas, with nearly $160 million of that coming from China alone. The movie was made for just $40 million, so I would say they made a nice profit. Transformers: The Last Knight is another interesting one. The movie made $130 million on a $217 million budget domestically, but internationally, it made an impressive $475 million. I just remember the 2013 Hansel and Gretel R-rated fairy tale action film. I enjoyed that movie, but the film barely registered with North American audiences. It had an opening weekend of just $19.7 million. In markets like Russia and other parts of Europe who were already familiar with the characters and the story, the movie was a genuine hit. It pulled in over $200 million worldwide. So what do these stats prove? I don't really know. Some movies just don't click with North American audiences and they do great abroad. Truthfully, I got the idea of this video from Reddit. Which other movies do you know flopped in the US but did amazing abroad? And also the inverse. Are there abroad produced movies that flopped there but blew up in the US? If you enjoyed this video, check out my last two videos on movie scenes that got inspired by art and the best visual samples in movie history. Also like and subscribe. See you in the next video.